Muammar Gaddafi called himself the brother leader, but he built a kingdom of silence where entire families vanished for speaking against him. He believed he was untouchable, but the walls finally closed in for him, and his last hours ended in the most humiliating way one could have imagined. Muammar Gaddafi came to power in 1969 after overthrowing King Idris in a military coup. He was only 27 years old, a young officer from a poor desert tribe who suddenly became the leader of the entire country. At first, he promised to free Libya from corruption and foreign control. For many Libyans, he seemed like a hero. He kicked out the British and American military bases, forced foreign oil companies to give Libya a bigger share of profits, and used that money to build roads, hospitals, and schools. Education became free, and healthcare was expanded. For ordinary Libyans in the 1970s, life felt like it was improving. But as the years passed, Gaddafi's rule became less about the people and more about himself. By the 1980s, he was feared more than respected. He built up secret police networks to spy on everyone. If someone spoke against him, they could disappear into prisons where torture was common. He made public executions a warning for others. His word was law, and nobody dared to question it. Outside Libya, Gaddafi tried to act like a revolutionary leader of the Arab world and Africa. He gave money and weapons to rebel groups and militias in other countries. This made him enemies abroad. In 1986, after Libyan agents were linked to bombings in Europe, American jets bombed Tripoli and Benghazi, even hitting Gaddafi's own compound. Later, Libya was blamed for the 1988 bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, which killed 270 people. Sanctions followed, cutting Libya off from much of the world. Still, he held on to power. Oil wealth gave him the means to buy loyalty at home. He paid tribes, military leaders, and elites to stay on his side. He also built a cult of personality. His face was everywhere, on posters, statues, even schoolbooks. He called himself the brother leader and the guide of the revolution, presenting himself as a father figure to the nation. But behind the slogans, many Libyans lived in silence and fear. By the 2000s, he tried to open up again to the West, making deals to end sanctions. But inside Libya, his control never softened. Opposition was crushed, and people had little to say in how the country was run. Then came 2011. Across North Africa and the Middle East, people rose up against dictators in what became known as the Arab Spring. Tunisia's ruler, Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, was forced out. Egypt's Hosni Mubarak fell soon after. Watching their neighbors break free gave Libyans courage. In February 2011, protests broke out in Benghazi and spread quickly. At first, they were peaceful, with people demanding change. But when Gaddafi ordered his forces to fire on demonstrators, everything changed. The country plunged into civil war. Rebel groups took control of Benghazi and other cities in the east. Gaddafi's forces responded with brutal force, using tanks and heavy weapons against neighborhoods. The world watched as civilians were caught in the middle. By March, NATO stepped in with airstrikes, saying it was to protect civilians from being massacred. The war dragged on for 8 months. Cities like Misrata endured endless shelling. Sirte, Gaddafi's hometown, turned into a battlefield. Thousands of Libyans died. Families fled their homes while others were trapped in the fighting. The country that once had oil wealth was now torn apart. By fall 2011, Sirte, once a proud city on the Mediterranean coast, had been reduced to rubble, and life in the city had become unbearable. Gaddafi was hiding in District Number 2, a small neighborhood that was still under his control. It was one of the last pockets of resistance left in Sirte. Instead of the palaces and luxury tents he once lived in, he now stayed in a run-down house with bare walls and little comfort. The man who had once been surrounded by gold, fine clothes, and servants was now surrounded by ruins. Around him were about 200 fighters. Many were loyal bodyguards who had followed him for years. Some were close relatives who refused to leave his side. His son, Muammar Gaddafi, was with him too, trying to keep spirits high and make plans for defense. But the truth was clear to everyone inside, that there was almost no way out. The city was completely surrounded by fighters loyal to the National Transitional Council. Every road leading out of Sirte was blocked. The men with him were tired, hungry, and low on ammunition. They knew they could not hold out much longer. Still, they stayed with him. Some fought out of loyalty, others out of fear, and some because they felt there was no point in running. That night, Gaddafi could not sleep. He paced the rooms relentlessly, moving from corner to corner. He spoke again and again about how he would never leave Libya, how he would rather die on his own land than surrender to his enemies. His words carried a mix of pride and desperation. Escape was no longer an option. He knew that if he tried to flee, NATO planes would track him, and rebels would catch him. As the hours passed, the sound of gunfire and explosions echoed closer and closer. District Number 2 was shrinking under heavy attack. The walls shook with every blast. By midnight, the atmosphere was tense and hopeless. His men whispered about their slim chances of survival. Some believed NATO might capture him alive. Others feared they would all be killed together. By sunrise on October 20th, 2011, the battle for Sirte had reached its final stage. The city had already been under siege for weeks, but now the last stand was happening. Fighters pushed into District Number 2 with heavy machine guns, rocket-propelled grenades, and mortars. Explosions echoed through the narrow streets. Inside those ruined blocks, Gaddafi's men tried to fight back. They were outnumbered, exhausted, and running out of ammunition. Many had not eaten properly in days, and some were already wounded. Still, they fired back from doorways, rooftops, and alleys, hoping to slow down the attackers. But their defenses were collapsing fast. One by one, buildings that had been used as shelters or firing positions were taken over by NTC forces. Some were blown apart by rockets, and others were stormed in close combat. The last loyalists were surrounded from every side. Dozens were killed in the streets. Others, seeing no way out, dropped their weapons and surrendered. For Gaddafi, the walls were closing in. The neighborhood was shrinking block by block, and soon there would be nothing left to defend. He realized he had to move. Staying hidden in the house meant certain death or capture. Around mid-morning, he made a desperate decision. With about 40 of his men, including bodyguards and close aides, he climbed into a convoy of cars and trucks. The plan was simple, but risky. They would try to break through the encirclement and flee south, across the desert, where they hoped to regroup or find safety. The convoy included several armed pickup trucks and SUVs, carrying what remained of his loyal fighters. It was a last gamble, and it failed. As soon as the convoy left the ruins of District Number 2, it was spotted from above. NATO drones had been circling over Sirte for days, watching every movement. French fighter jets were also patrolling the skies. They knew Gaddafi might try to escape, and they were ready. Not long after the convoy started moving, the first missile was fired. It came down fast and struck one of the vehicles. The explosion tore through the air, sending fire and smoke into the sky. In seconds, several cars were destroyed. Flames spread quickly, and ammunition stored inside some of the trucks began to cook off, creating smaller blasts. Fighters inside screamed in panic, and chaos broke out. The road was suddenly filled with wreckage. Some cars were flipped on their sides. Others smashed into each other trying to avoid the fire. Black smoke made it hard to see. Survivors stumbled out of the vehicles, coughing and bleeding, trying to find cover from the next strike. Dozens were killed instantly, many of them Gaddafi's most trusted guards who had stayed with him until the end. These were men who had once lived comfortably under his protection. But now, their bodies were left scattered across the desert road. Mutassim's car was also hit, badly damaged. He was injured, but managed to survive the first blast. Gaddafi's own vehicle took heavy damage. It could no longer move, leaving him with no choice but to escape on foot. Dust and fire surrounded him as he climbed out, helped by a few of the men who were still alive. News of the NATO strike spread quickly. Fighters of the NTC rushed to the site, eager to finish what years of war had started. They moved across the smoking wreckage, stepping past burned cars and shattered bodies. Survivors were running in all directions, and the fighters chased them down one by one. Among those fleeing was Gaddafi himself. He was covered in dust and looked nothing like the brother leader, but an old man, exhausted, trembling, and broken. In desperation, he crawled into a large drainage pipe at the side of the road, hoping to disappear in the shadows. But the fighters were too close behind. They spotted movement inside the pipe and rushed toward it. With shouts and gunfire, they pulled him out. The moment was chaos. Gunfire went off around him, and bullets tore into his body. Blood ran down his head and chest. He was no longer the man who once stood on balconies for hours, lecturing entire nations. He was silent, helpless, and surrounded. Not far away, his son Mutassim was also captured. Unlike his father, he could still walk, though his body was covered in wounds. By midday, the reign of Muammar Gaddafi had ended in the most humiliating way. But his suffering was not over yet. He was dragged through the angry crowd of fighters. Men shouted over each other, some calling for him to be taken alive and put on trial, while others demanded his death immediately. In that moment, there was no order, no clear command. Just rage boiling over decades of fear and bloodshed. What followed was not a clean arrest, but a frenzy that historians still argue about today. The fighters surrounded him from every side. They hit him with the butts of their rifles, kicked him as he stumbled, and struck him with whatever they carried. Some pulled out knives and stabbed him. Others raised their guns and fired at close range. He cried out in pain, but his voice was lost in the roar of the mob. Phone cameras recorded the chaos, capturing the screams, the blows, and the raw violence of a dictator's final minutes. By the time Gaddafi was hauled onto the back of a pickup truck, he was barely clinging to life. His body was soaked in blood. His face was swollen and cut. He no longer looked like the ruler who once filled international headlines. He was stripped of all dignity, reduced to a broken man lying helplessly in the dust, surrounded by people who had once lived in fear of him. Around 1 p.m., his life ended. The exact cause of death is still disputed. Some say it was a gunshot to the head fired at close range. Others believe it was blood loss from the many stab wounds, beatings, and bullet injuries. What is certain is that his final moments were filled with pain, confusion, and humiliation. His son Mutassim also met a brutal end. He was beaten, paraded in front of fighters, and later executed. His body, like his father's, was shown in public. When the news spread that Muammar Gaddafi was dead, celebrations broke out among the NTC fighters. Gunfire filled the air as a sign of victory, and men shouted with joy. After 8 long months of war, Sirte had finally fallen. For many rebels, this moment felt like the end of decades of fear, the end of a ruler who had controlled every part of Libyan life. They believed they had taken back their country. But on the ground, the cost of victory was written in ruins. Sirte, once a modern coastal town with wide streets and homes built with oil money, was left in devastation. Thousands of families had fled during the siege, and those who stayed behind paid a terrible price. Civilians searched through debris for missing relatives, and survivors spoke of hunger, thirst, and days spent trapped in basements while bombs fell above them. Although the death of Gaddafi brought a moment of relief for many Libyans, almost immediately another problem appeared. With him gone, there was no strong central authority to unite the country. Different rebel groups, tribes, and militias all wanted a share of power. The unity that had existed against Gaddafi quickly began to fall apart. Gaddafi's body was transported from Sirte to the city of Misrata. Misrata had suffered greatly during the war, with months of siege and heavy casualties. Many of its people considered his capture and death a form of revenge for all the pain they had endured. Instead of being given a private burial, his corpse was taken to a cold storage room, usually used for meat. It was a small, dim place, but for the fighters in charge, it was practical. They wanted the body preserved so that everyone could see it. Word spread quickly, and soon, long lines formed outside. Men, women, and even children came, sometimes traveling from other towns, just to confirm with their own eyes that the dictator was gone. Some spat at the body. Others took photos on their phones. For 4 days, the body lay on display. The National Transitional Council used this moment carefully. They wanted to end all rumors that he might still be alive or had escaped. Showing the body was their way of confirming his death. But the sight also revealed something troubling. Instead of a trial or formal justice, what the world saw was vengeance. The public display turned his death into a spectacle, one that had blurred the line between celebration and brutality. After 4 days, the bodies of Gaddafi, his son Mutassim, and his longtime defense minister Abu Bakr Yunus were finally removed. They were taken to the desert and buried in secret. No exact place was ever revealed. The new leaders feared that if a grave became known, it might either become a site of worship for loyalists or a place of attack for enemies. So his final resting place, like the end of his rule, was hidden, leaving only questions about the true location in the Libyan sands. News of his death spread across the globe within hours. In Western capitals, leaders declared it a turning point. U.S. President Barack Obama said Libya had a chance to build a new future. Leaders in France and Britain, who had pushed hardest for NATO's intervention, called it proof that their decision to act was right. NATO itself quickly announced that its mission was coming to an end, claiming that civilians were now safe and the war was over. At the United Nations, there were calls for Libya to move toward democracy. Many diplomats spoke of elections, rebuilding, and reconciliation. To much of the outside world, Gaddafi's fall looked like the final step in the wave of the Arab Spring. But not everyone celebrated. Human rights groups immediately raised concerns. They pointed to the videos of Gaddafi's capture and death, saying that what happened looked less like justice and more like revenge. International law requires that even dictators accused of crimes be given a trial. Instead, Gaddafi had been beaten and killed in the street. Groups like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch warned that this set a dangerous example for Libya's future. Across Africa, reactions were mixed. Some leaders, especially those who had once received money and support from Gaddafi, mourned his death. Others stayed silent, fearing that their own people might be inspired to rise up in the same way. In the Middle East, many ordinary citizens watched closely. For some, his fall gave hope that other dictators could also be brought down. For others, it was a warning of the chaos that might follow. Inside Libya, the global attention did not erase the uncertainty. People wondered what would come next. Gaddafi's death ended one era, but it opened a door to questions no one could yet answer.